we had the chance to interview Adam Lang, the Director of Policy at Carnegie UK. Enjoy. Why do some oligarchs become symbols of entrepreneurial genius and others are kind of vilified or viewed as threats to social cohesion?
So I think part of the answer to that question lies in status and power as much as it does wealth. Because there's lots of wealthy people out there, there's lots of different ways of accumulating wealth or earning or inheriting wealth. But I think it's how some people choose to use it and how they choose to engage with the political processes, whether that's here in the UK or internationally. The US is obviously the place that draws a lot of this attention. So I think that part of it is about what people do with the status and the wealth and the influence that they have and how that's exerted. There's also questions in there about how it's regulated from a state point of view, how transparent these things are, and as some of the session we've been at today have been looking at, how we get much more open about our democracy and who's engaged in our democracy, how decisions are made, whose influence is heard. All these sorts of things are really important to kind of mitigate some of those concerns that people might have about people with great wealth having great influence.
Should philanthropic contributions be considered political acts when they influence public services, education and healthcare systems? And if so, how should they be regulated?
Great question. So that's a really good question. I think that it is, politics in the context of that question is inescapable, because in the democracy that we live in here, these things are governed by politics. So our healthcare, our education, our infrastructure, these are things that are influenced by the parties we elect to, or the individuals rather we elect to represent us, the parties they are part of, and the governments and coalitions that they form. So politics is inescapable, and therefore I think it is impossible to disentangle the idea of the engagement of philanthropy in the political process. But to be very clear, I don't think that means that it is inherently a bad thing. I think it can be a very positive and good thing. And one of the things we talked about today is that there's not just one type of philanthropy. There are lots of types of philanthropy, and a lot of it is community-led, grassroots level philanthropy, where there's great engagement about where funds, big or small, should go, how they should be used. But of course, there are other ends of that spectrum as well, where philanthropy works more at the state level. And again, there are versions of that can be really positive. We talked today about how philanthropy can be used almost as a kind of form of sort of risk capital for the state to help de-risk decisions that if it was just the government alone, local or national, they might not want to do something, they might not be able to do something, or they might not even know how to do something. So in that context, bringing in philanthropic wealth or philanthropic money or resource or time can be really additive to the state. But it does all have to be grounded in a really open state, a really open process, and a really transparent way of communicating to people where the money for things is coming from and how it's being used.
So looking more towards where you work, which is Carnegie UK,
yeah.
I had to look at the mission statement, and one word that kept popping up is well-being.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious why that word over things that are similar like welfare. Is it because welfare is a stigmatised word, or can you explain it?
Yeah, happy to explain. So our the use of well-being in our strategy, in our kind of organisational mission, actually dates right back to our founding over 100 years ago from Andrew Carnegie himself, who, when he established our UK-wide trust, our mission was to improve the well-being of people across the UK and Ireland, and that's something that is still with us to this day. One of the things that Andrew Carnegie was very forward-thinking about, particularly given this was over 100 years ago, is that he was quite progressive in the idea of leaving open to the trustees of the day how that was interpreted, to ensure that it was interpreted in a way that was relevant to the needs of the time. So for us today, in 2025, the way we interpret that at Carnegie UK today, and our trustees have guided us to do so, is this: a term that we call collective well-being, and that's not just to add more jargon into the mix, but there is a reason why we call it collective well-being, because we believe that we can best use the resources we have to improve the well-being of people by intervening at a public policy level, by bringing new evidence to bear, new insights, so conducting research, understanding complex issues, and bringing evidence to bear that we think will help make the biggest impact to our collective well-being. So not just my well-being or your well-being, but those sort of policy level interventions where the most people will benefit. And in particular, because of our charitable nature, we're really passionate about ensuring those who are furthest from that idea of having a sense of well-being, so perhaps some of the poorest or most marginalised or most disenfranchised people in our societies, that they are the focus of the kind of policy interventions that we're trying to see.
I can hear your passion coming through when you're speaking, so it's palpable. Lastly, I wanted to talk about one of the publications from last year,
Sure.
Specifically the Poverty Truth Maiden speech. I picked that one because it struck a chord with me, because I've lived through persistent poverty my whole life. I still do to an extent. But one bit in particular stuck out to me, which is the detachment between decision makers and the real life consequences of the decisions they make. So my question to you is,
Sure.
What meaningful reconnection between the two do you think could work, and not just at policy level, but in practice?
Yeah, that's another great question, and I'm going to be really honest up front and say I don't think there's any one easy answer to that question. I think it's a really complicated one, but it's a really important one. So, just to reference the report you mentioned and the programme of work. So we have a partnership with the Poverty Truth Network, who are a UK-wide organisation that hold to this idea, this mantra of nothing about us is for us without us. And it's this idea of engaging with people who have lived experience, either past or present, of poverty, and ensuring that their voices are heard in local decision making and are used to influence both local understanding and local decisions to improve issues. And that's something that aligns very much with our ideas, with our ethos, and with the things we care about. So we wanted to partner with them to run a series of workshops and meetings and sessions across the UK to engage with the networks they represent, to understand our issues, which, as I was saying, are often quite policy level, if you like, quite sort of government level or system level, through the lens of people with lived experience of what that means on the ground in different places. And that's partly to help us be better at understanding those issues ourselves, but also better at advocating on behalf of some of the communities they represent. But also, as you've alluded to hear from people who think about some of these things in a way that, when you're immersed in like policy reports or government process or parliament process, it can sometimes be easy to lose track of or lose sight of. And the language of parliament as well is often different. So to hear testimonies or lived experience or real world examples, as you've sort of alluded to in other ways as well, is a really important part of that partnership we have with the Poverty Truth Network. And the maiden speeches that you referenced was an attempt to say, because we were engaging with the Poverty Truth Network at that time when the new UK government were coming in. So this idea of maiden speeches, which is the first speech that a new MP gives in the House of Commons, it's called their maiden speech. It's an historical term. This idea of what would a Poverty Truth Network maiden speech look like, and a lot of the theme that came out really consistently across that work that we did was this idea of this disconnect, this sense of people don't always understand the real world implications of the policy decisions that can, for many people, often feel that they're taken very far away from their day-to-day lived experience. And that's something that we recognise, we completely agree with, and is really important for us in our work and making sure we always champion that. And so these maiden speeches have given us a great vehicle to engage elected officials with, but also for us as an organisation to continually reference back to sort of remind ourselves about how some of our sometimes quite conceptual issues or quite policy level issues that we deal with, how they connect to the real world, people's day-to-day lives, and why what we're doing matters.
So again, all coming back to collective well-being.
That's what we're trying to do. Sometimes it can feel like you're going a bit like that, but that's the idea for sure, is that trying to bring this back to, well, how can we try and influence the policy decisions that will affect the most people in the most positive way.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you.